Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next Future Leaders Group of OpenUK lunchtime training session. A little bit of introduction about the Future Leaders Group. We're a collection of individuals who are interested in open technology, including open source software, open hardware, and open data. It includes a wide range of people that work in technology, intellectual property, outsourcing, procurement, data, coding, and innovation, and it's both got private practice lawyers and in-house counsel as well that work in the technology sector and related fields. We operate under the direction of the OpenUK Legal and Policy Committee, and we have a purpose to bring together and develop future leaders in legal and policy matters relating to technology, and to support and further the mission of the Legal and Policy Committee. My name is Robert Grinnells, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Future Leaders Group, along with Katie Gibson, and we're both lawyers advising on technology and commercial matters. The group is always open to new ideas and to new members, whether getting involved in all of our activities or just dipping in and out of our various projects, including these lunchtime training sessions. And I'd like to just hand over to Amanda Brock, CEO of OpenUK, to introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks very much, Rob. These sessions are very appreciated in that we've had some of the great and the good of the open source community come and do the training for our Future Leaders Group, and they are available obviously online. We're looking to move them onto YouTube so that they have an even wider distribution shortly. And it's a great pleasure to invite Jonathan Riddell today. Jonathan is based in Scotland and a very active member of the KDE community. We've known each other a long time. We worked together at Canonical, where Jonathan worked and still works on Kubuntu. Jonathan works in Edinburgh for Blue Systems these days, and he is an interesting character, to say the least, with a very active interest as a canoe coach. He has a menagerie of bees and other beasties at his home near Edinburgh, and he also is a leading light in our awards committee. He's the chair of our awards committee, having been the lead judge last year on the Open Source Awards in Scotland. And for anybody on this call or who's watching this video before the 30th of June, nominations are open to the 30th of June, as I'm sure Jonathan will also tell you. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to KDE's Jonathan Riddell to talk about apps, because it's all about the apps.
Thank you, Amanda, and happy Phase 2 to everyone in Scotland. We get to have a few more liberties today and meet up with 2 households now. So I'm planning my weekend drinks today to invite not just one friend, but 2 friends around in the garden, which is feels like quite the luxury. Today I want to talk about my goal, my challenge to the KDE community, which is to be all about the apps. At KDE, we are an open community, friendly community. I put a question mark there because sometimes tempers get frayed and turns out we're a bunch of nerds and sometimes we don't communicate properly, but we certainly aspire to be friendly. An open community making end-user software. So we're a bunch of hippies. We're the people who just want to have a bit of fun making beautiful looking functional software for your laptop, for your computers. And we've got well, it's hard to count how many different projects there are within that KDE community, and depending on how you slice it up, but we've got maybe 200 different applications. We've got 60 odd different frameworks and libraries that those are built upon. We make desktop software. We also have a very wide definition of what we're allowed, of what the community can work with. So we've got Wiki to Learn, which is a textbook wiki, completely different from many of our other projects. And it should be all platforms, and everybody should be welcome to come and join us. And we defined, a few years ago, we wanted to define what it was that would be welcome and encouraged within KDE, and what was not quite done within KDE. So we wrote the KDE manifesto to say what we're all about, and that means any project is welcome to join us, as long as it's got open governance, as long as it's freely licensed. It's inclusive and welcoming to everybody, that is innovative stuff. But the important part here is the communal ownership of the project. If you people often in open source start a project to scratch an itch. I really need a program that does something, that makes UML models. Then they put some work into writing that, but then maybe life moves on and they lose interest and they get a job or a boyfriend or whatever, and they have to work, And so it's a common feature of open source free software programs that they're often abandoned. And within KDE, we understand that's part of the natural life cycle of these things. But because we have common ownership, anybody within the community, and there's about 200, I think, odd people who have commit rights to our code, anybody can commit to anything. Which means that every project has to have a social structure to have people who can say what an individual project allows, and everybody with developer access has to understand that social code. But if for whatever reason that social code breaks down because a key developer has lost interest and wandered off elsewhere, the common ownership allows for the project to continue. And that's a really important part of what makes us a long-standing project from 96 until now, 24 years, which has successfully been something that makes a difference to people's computers. So we like to emphasize that we're a fun-friendly community. So on the front page of KDE.org, we've got pretty photos of all our meetings, and it's an important aspect of why we do free software. Is not just because we want to create useful bits of software for my needs, useful bits of software for other people's need. We also get to travel the world, and that's really a great aspect of why I love working in free software. You get to travel the world, often with other people sponsoring it for you, and you get to meet people from around the world. Not this year, unfortunately. Of course, we're having online meetings and online conferences, but that's also fun. But the traveling will return. To give you the history of it, a little history lesson. Back in 1996, a nice guy, Matthias Ecklich, wanted to put Linux on computers for his family because it worked great for him. This stuff was taking over the server world, and he thought, well, great, I can get rid of Windows 95 has come out recently. Don't need to pay lots of money for that. I can install this Linux stuff on computers for my family. Until he actually did it and worked out that this stuff, it was a mess. It didn't make any sense. The desktop software was clunky. The browser software, Netscape, didn't fit in. The Office software equally was very clunky. It didn't fit in. It didn't successfully even talk to the window manager properly. And yeah, if you're a nerd, you can work around all that, but normal people don't want that and want a more integrated workspace. So he created the concept of a desktop environment, which has your panels and your wallpapers, but it's also got a suite of integrated applications that go with that, your file manager and your settings application and Office suite and so forth. So he, after a couple of years, he succeeded in that. He got enough of a community around to create that and release KDE 1 with the panel down here at the bottom, familiar icons on the desktop, familiar file browser. If you want to use a command line, then that's great, that's there too. And so it was a pioneering move, and for a long time that was the standard for what would happen if you installed Linux. And having succeeded in that, we all thought, great, Linux on desktop, it's going to take off. And I remember being at a sales conference in London, Olympia, a big one, with IBM, where one of their speakers was saying, Linux has taken off on the server now, we're going all out for that, and next we're expecting it to take off on the desktop, which didn't quite happen, but we're still not insignificant. So our desktop these days is called Plasma, and Plasma 5 got released some time ago. I'm the release manager. I just did a new release, Plasma 5.19, this month, and we're really pleased at the state of our desktop software. KDE has gone in and out of fashion over the years as other desktop projects have come and gone in Linux, and there's now quite a large number of them. and based on the quality of our software, of course, we have people who are particularly passionate about it and will insist on using nothing much, and other people who are particularly passionate against it, and that's often the case in this world, that people are particularly tribalistic, but in a friendly way. But with Plasma 5, we're really pleased that it is powerful, simple by default, and powerful when needed. You install it, and it looks like your familiar Windows 95 layout with the applications menu in the bottom left, and you've got a file manager that fits in, panel down at the bottom, but it's fully customizable. It's very customizable. You can create different themes, different looks. The panels can go here, there, and everywhere. And it's a lot of fun to work with. It's also enterprise friendly insofar as you can lock it down. So we've got a big rollout, for example, in Munich City Council, and they have it set up to look just like the familiar default Windows 95 style layout that everyone knows and loves. But they change the settings to make sure that nobody can mess it around, because you sit down at your neighbor's hot desking computer and you want to know how to start an application. So they lock it down to make sure that it is familiar to everybody and people don't spend too long playing around with their desktop. Hello, Sammy. You turned your microphone on. So we're reliant upon our Linux distributions. We make releases of our programs and our desktop software and whatnot, and we announce that they're available, and then all the Linux distributions will package that up and make that available to their users. And so that's just a typical way of how the open source world tends to work, is that we release this stuff and we say it's got loads of great new features, but then we're reliant upon other projects to be able to spread that out and distribute it and make sure that it's secure and make sure that it's functional and usable. But Linux on desktop in the last 20 odd years hasn't yet achieved world domination, and I just want to put out some random thoughts why that hasn't been the case. Because we all did think in the late 90s, this is great, this is cheaper, more customizable, more compatible. It doesn't deliberately lock you out in the way that a lot of proprietary programs does. Surely everyone's going to switch to this on their desktop computers and their laptops in the next few years. Didn't really happen, and it's hard to say why exactly Linux has been so successful on servers, phones, embedded devices, and not on the desktop. But it'll be a bunch of reasons. The easy one that we like to point out is Microsoft have a monopoly, and they've abused their monopoly by making laptop manufacturers only install their operating system and so forth in it. There will be truth in that, and that is a barrier, but it's far from the only problem, of course. Old habits die hard. People know and love Windows, so when they want to go into work, they want their work laptop to work much the same as their home one, and vice versa. Also, it's not slick enough. We think in KDE with Plasma that we've put in a lot of effort into making it beautiful and simple by default, and making it visually slick and smooth. But it won't compete with Apple in terms of being as shiny and nice. Not enough apps. Well, in terms of absolute numbers, it may well compete with Windows and Mac, but if you are dependent on one particular application that only works on Windows for your job, then of course you've got to use that. Not integrated with all the hardware retailers, and people have tried. There have been plenty of companies that have tried to sell Linux on laptops, and they've succeeded to some extent, but not a very big extent. And there's a lot of traction there, or maybe a vicious circle where laptop manufacturers won't sell it in large numbers with Linux on it because there's not people buying it, but then people can't buy it if it's not available by default. And nobody's yet cracked that problem. Yeah, there's poor branding. too split up. You buy Windows, you know it's Windows. You buy Mac, you know it's Mac. You buy Linux, well, which distro are you going to use? Which desktop environment are you going to use? Yeah, too many competing solutions. Too many silly Ks. I hate names that begin with K. I tried all my years to try and get KDE to not pick names that begin with Ks, and succeeded to some extent. But it is the sort of thing that puts people off in poor branding. But mostly, there's not really any good reason to change. Windows is good enough, Mac is good enough, so there's no dying reason to change, and unless we change form factor, and we've been slow to pick up new form factors, unfortunately. Having said that, there is a popular website, I don't know if anybody's heard of it, called Pornhub. They do biology education videos. I haven't seen any, I'm not a biologist, but I believe it's a very popular website. And they publish their stats of who visits their website. And it's 3/4 Windows, it's 15% Mac. Chromos has succeeded with Google launching that successfully, 4%. That's a significant number. But Linux there is 2%, so yeah, that's the smallest of the slices, other than the mysterious other. The 2% is the smallest of the slices, but if it's a billion unit market, if you've got 2 billion computers out there, 2% of those 2 billion desktop laptops out there is still a significant number. Any commercial project would be happy with that. So as I said earlier, we're very reliant on these third-party projects to distribute our software. We're a bunch of hippies. We make the stuff for our own interest, our own fun, and then we really sit under very generous licenses, GPL, to say anybody can and please take this and distribute it. But we're very reliant on those third parties, and that always seemed to me non-optimal. You can see how Apple has succeeded in breaking that Microsoft monopoly by having integrated hardware, software that looks slick to the end user. You just buy it, and it's a solution. So I started a project a few years ago called KDE Neon, with the idea of bringing a lot of the work that was done by external projects within KDE. Within KDE Neon, we build the software applications, desktop libraries that get released by KDE. This changes the open source model in a lot of ways. It means that a community like KDE is no longer dependent on a third party to distribute their software. It means we can take some control with the timescale. Because what would happen is we would release a new suite of applications, or release a new desktop. We'd say it's got this great new features, and our users would say, great, how can I get that? And we didn't have a good answer to that. What would also happen is we would release some software, and it would have some bug in it, because we happen not to have any of our developers who's been trying that feature of that particular setup. And so it would get out into the distributions, into the hands of our users, and people go, well, it's got this obvious bug in it. And we go, oh no, we need to fix it. Here's the fix, but then that's got to go back to the distribution. That's got to take some time to filter down to the user. Very non-optimal. So with KDE Neon, I wanted to create a project that would package up all of KDE software promptly and automatically, and using modern software development techniques that we were very slow to pick up on in KDE. So we would use Jenkins as the continuous automated builders. So we would set watchers on that, and this is my main contribution to KDE, is what I spend most of my time on, is making sure that this works in a smooth automated way. It will watch, there's been a new release, grab that straight away, build it, do the QA, and then release it once the QA passed. It's not quite as slick as that, but we're close. Yeah, so we have OpenQA as part of it, which is a project from SUSE, again, slightly disconnected from KDE. So we create our own instance of that within KDE to make sure that we can check that it works. ourselves without waiting for third-party distributions. Share my screen. There's my screen. There's a video. Yeah, so OpenQA is a really nice project where on our cloud servers we launch up the KDE Neon operating system in a virtual machine, and it sees what will be displayed on a real monitor. And for the quality assurance, we create images, screenshots, and we match those images and say to the OpenQA system, it should match this image. It should look like this in this area to this fuzziness degree. And so we've got a suite of OpenQA tests for this as the KDE Neon installer to make sure that when we put out a new installable image, it really does pass it really does do what we say it would do, rather than have some bug in it. And so this is a recording from the OpenQA system where it's installing it into a virtual machine, and it knows where to click, and it knows when to click, and it knows what the screenshot should look like after that, and it can verify that it's correct and proper. And OpenQA, as I say, that was a great SUSE project, still is, but is even more slick if it can be done upstream within the open source project that is KDE. So it installed it there. It runs a few bits on the command line to make sure that it can work automatically, and then it successfully tests: can we launch these applications? Can I click on the right buttons? Can I log out? And then it makes it green. Oh, there's another random talk. Stop screen sharing, start my camera. Oh. Yeah, so KDE Neon is our project to use a stable base. We use the Ubuntu base. Hello, Amanda. Am I in trouble? We use the Ubuntu base, which is a stable one that has long-term support, but you get the latest KDE software. So if you're passionate about what we make as an end-user community project, you can get the latest stuff today, and know that when there are bugs in it, you can talk to us directly, and we will be part of the project that fix those bugs. Our software is all made with a library called Qt, which is cross-desktop framework library. It makes the buttons and the scroll bars and whatnot. It's very slick and shiny these days. It's got Qt Quick to create touchable, scalable interfaces. And it's cross-platform. So if you're doing graphical user interface work, I strongly recommend using Qt anywhere on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and Android, and probably several other platforms, because it allows you to write your stuff once, and then it pretty much works anywhere. And that's been the foundation for what KDE has used for most of our software. And we make pretty applications. So I'm started getting to the point of my talk. How much time do I have left, Amanda? I think I've got enough, but I'm about halfway through.
You have had 25 minutes and just under, so you are perfect on timing. And I wasn't coming on to give you a row. I was coming on to see if you needed any help.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'm just coming on to the point of my talk. So we create these applications. We created the original idea of a desktop environment where the applications would fit in with desktop environment. And since then, I love our applications. They're kind of world class. Can I screen share again? Let's see. So we've got, for example, a patience game, classic, important on anybody's desktop. So we've got the sort of trivial but fun stuff, the games, the integrated file manager, of course, is it's important that just works without getting in your way and works how you expect it to. But we've also got some world-class applications like KDE as a video editor. This thing is very powerful, very complex. Artists love to use a dark theme, so it likes to start up in a dark theme by default. But you can successfully create and edit videos very well with that. One of our leading applications is Krita, which is a painting application. started out 20 years ago as a clone of Photoshop. That's already been filled in the free software open source world with GIMP quite successfully, so they specialized into creating it as a painting application where you can use a lot of the effects that mirror real-world applications, real-world artist techniques, such as these brushes. And so they create a lot of beautiful artworks with that. And more specialist fun stuff, such as Minuet. It helps you learn piano chords and learn to play the keyboard. Or J'ai compris, spelt G-compress, but it's pronounced in French J'ai compris, which, if you know your French, means I understand. And it's got hundreds, certainly dozens of these application of children's learning events, children's learning practices, full of games there. What else was I was going to show? A stitching program. So this is somebody who does needlework and needs an application to do that. Turns out there's quite a lot of people who use needlework and need computer software to recreate their designs on, and so we're able to include that sort of relatively specialist but still got a large audience type of application. Yeah, so we created all these. We created a desktop environment. We created integrated applications. As part of that, people came along and created some world-class, some special interest, some relatively trivial, but still useful and functional and fun applications. And I realized that as a community project, we were being held back by the idea of being a desktop environment, because it creates the idea that if you make an application using our technologies as part of our community, then it's an application for people that run your desktop environment, which is nonsense. Of course, you can run any application on any Linux desktop, but also because we're built on Qt, most of our applications are cross-platform. They're relatively easy to rebuild on Windows and Mac and Android. And so a lot of our output was being limited by the idea that, well, this application is for KDE, so if you don't use the KDE's desktop, then it's not for you and you should go and find something else. So I wanted to try and change the culture within KDE, because that idea that an application is for KDE, that comes to a large extent from us, from our own community, saying that stuff is for KDE and not putting a lot of effort into distributing it ourselves, just waiting for the Linux distributions to ship it for us, which is great that they do that, but it's, as an end user, it feels disconnected. So I set a goal for the KDE community. For a few years, we've been having the idea that people can set goals to be challenges to work on as a whole community. And the goal is called All About the Apps, and it is to try and highlight some of our great applications that people make as part of KDE, out with just being installed in the Linux distribution for people who use our desktop environment. Because it turns out in the last decade, there's been a whole bunch of app stores that have come along that have changed how people get their applications. And in the open sourcey bunch of hippies working on our stuff, we're quite focused, and we were focused on how our workflows and weren't able to change, or didn't very speedily change to the new workflows, where it turns out you can make your own packages, your own installable applications, and put it on a store and people can get them directly. And this is because we're nerds and we stay very focused. And I play Canoe Polo, which is a fast and furious game where you got a team of 5 people in kayaks and another team of 5, and you splash around on the water throwing a ball around to get it into a goal. And I've learned that I can often be far too focused. I'll get hold of the ball, and the first thing I see, there's a teammate over there, I can pass to him, there's a goal over there, I could score a goal there. I wouldn't get past that first move that I could make, because I was too focused. And at times in life, you've got to defocus. You've got to sit back and go, this is how we change the situation. Turns out there could be somebody over there that I could pass to. Turns out the goal is covered, so I need to pass back to my goalie and just reset the whole game. Turns out that when you ship your source code and expect somebody else to distribute it for you, that will limit who gets the end application, because only people who use that other third-party project will get it, and they won't necessarily get it in time, although they'll need to hunt around for how to get it in time, and we can take control. And so my challenge to the KDE community was to ship their software more directly within these stores. Within Linux, for example, we've got a bunch of new package formats, FlatHub and Snaps and AppImage, where these packages can be built once and then installed on any Linux distribution, which is new and different from how Linux has always worked in the past, where you have to build it for a particular version of a specific Linux distribution, so you have to build things 20 times. And if somebody always comes along and says, oh, can you not build it for my preferred Linux distro? Well, that's been holding us back. So I've tried to say we need to embrace these new formats, FlatHub and the app stores, FlatHub, Snapcraft and AppImage Hub, but also we need to embrace different platforms. Our friends at Microsoft have an app store. We can put our software there now because we're cross-platform. The same for the other ones. Now this means we need to change some of our ideas of how we ship our software. We need to take responsibility for the security updates, for making sure that everything is up to date on all the different, just with the latest version, different stores. We need to be the front line for people coming up with bugs or just questions for how they use our software. So it means taking on new responsibilities, new slightly scary aspects of how we expect people to use our stuff, and that's part of the challenge. So, for example, Snapcraft here is the app store and format that came along with Canonical, and they make Ubuntu. They make this package format where you can install the packages on pretty much any Linux distribution. So I've spent some time packaging everything up to make sure that all our apps are available on that store. One of the nice new things that comes with this is because this is a centralized store, you then get some actual concrete numbers of how many people are installing your app. Ocular is a popular PDF reader, and we now can know that that's got 42,000 installs, which we were never able to before. Know vaguely who used our software, where they used their software, which distros they used. So this slide shows it is mostly people on the previous stable release of Ubuntu still, but a good number moving to the new long-term support stable release of Ubuntu, and people on a bunch of different variants as well. And we know where the software is installed. Turns out we've got a lot of users in North America. There's 5,000 odd there for that particular application. Also a lot in Germany, no surprise there. For KDE, it's always had a strong following and developer base from Germany, but also popular enough in India and South America. And so this is exciting because we can now go, oh, we've tried to reach out to these different communities. We think we've been successful, but we now have a few metrics to say, yes, we have been successful. We had to create a desktop software for installing the stuff. So this is Discover, and that's our app store, local app install program. It used to be called just a package manager, but the concept of packages is too nerdy. And this should work fairly transparently with all the different app stores. So you can create this application from your local apt Debian packages, or from FlatHub, or from Snap. And you, as the user, you don't need to care. It's got a default option, but many people will go, oh yeah, I trust the FlatHub store because I know that one gets updated more frequently, or I know it gets better security eyeballs, for example. FlatHub is another app store another packaging format called Flatpak, and that comes out of Red Hat and GNOME. But again, it works on pretty much any Linux distribution. So I'm keen to make sure that KDE gets as many of its applications in there as possible. Similarly, AppImage Hub uses the AppImage format, and to some extent this feels a bit like there's all these 3 different competing formats. It's a bit like there's all these different competing Linux distributions, and we're being split up, and there is a bit of that. But well, competition can be good, and they're all compatible. You can install stuff from one store and install another application from another store, and it should all just work. And that's a real change compared to how open source has worked in the past, because we can now install stuff that works anywhere. But it's a challenge for those of us who've been around for 20 years to change our mindset of how that works. We also, because we base stuff on Qt, we can be cross-platform, so we're keen to get stuff into the Microsoft store as well, for use on Windows, because they've got many more users than Linux desktops. So we've been putting applications in the Microsoft store as well, and it's fun because we've got this tribalistic dislike of Microsoft because of how they've treated the laptop market in the past. But it's time to move on. It's time to accept that yeah, we compete over here with them, but also over here we can cooperate and be partners, and that's really nice to be able to do that. So Krita, I've mentioned a few times, that's our painting application that's often seen as a good flagship for the output of KDE because it's so complete and it's so world-class. They're on the Microsoft Store, and they charge money for that. They charge £8 for that. And when they did that, there was a bit of a worry that, oh, we're a bunch of hippies and people will object to paying for open source free software, which is available for free elsewhere. But in order to counter that, they've still kept up the free Windows download, so you can still go to Krita.org and download the Windows binary for that at no cost. Or if you want a more slick, smooth, integrated, automatically updated version, you can get it from the Windows Store. And they've been very successful in that, and they're able to hire and pay developers because they've been able to sell stuff on that Windows Store. But why stick to the laptop? Why stick to the desktop? Why stick to full-size applications? The world has moved on long since onto handheld computers, smartphones, and so we should get our stuff onto the smartphone stores, onto Google Play and F-Droid. And this is where we've been a bit slower because it needs more work, because you have to change the user interface a bit, and you have to make sure that it's slick and smooth and doesn't depend upon mouse clicks and so forth. So there's only a few applications in Google Play Store, but they're there, and I'm keen to make sure that we get more. F-Droid is another app store for Android and is more hippie and free software and open source friendly. But I'm keen to make sure we get more apps on there. Mac, on the other hand, a bit sad. Mac, still very closed, not too friendly to open source. Interesting story though with Mac, of course. It used to be that for a few years that KDE had the leading web browser on Linux, Conqueror, back when Netscape was still trying to exist or Mozilla hadn't been able to take off yet. And that's not been the case now for some time. We don't have the best web browser, so we all tend to use Firefox or Chrome. But it turns out Chrome comes from Conqueror. In fact, most web browser software these days comes from KDE, because our web browser, which was the best one in the early noughties, that got forked by Apple to make WebKit, which they use in Safari. That got forked by Google to make their Chrome engines, and that's been forked by Microsoft now to be in Microsoft's Edge. So it's a really fun aspect of what can come out of KDE, is that most of the world's web browsers now, everything apart from Firefox, originated within KDE. I would love to get our apps on the Apple Mac App Store, but it's a much more closed environment, and they're not free software friendly. They don't allow you to comply with the GPL, as I understand it, because they don't allow you to ship source code along with it. So we've not particularly embraced that so much. What we have embraced is the other way around, is a project called Homebrew, which is the other way around from what's happened on Linux, where you had a package repository and that's for your distro only, and you can install the stuff and it will install the dependencies of the right version with it. But if you want to install something from out with that repository, then that's difficult. On the Mac, they've had isolated containerized applications since Mac OS X came along. But there's a good use case. There's a reason why Linux users like their packaging repositories, and Homebrew is a project to create free software packaging repositories for Macs. And so this month I've welcomed Homebrew KDE repository into KDE, where this guy Yuri takes KDE software, makes it available through Homebrew for your Apple Mac. So if you're the sort of person who enjoys using an Apple Mac but also uses a command line, then all our applications are now available through Homebrew, which is really fun aspects of how the best of Linux is now going onto other platforms. And then another app store that we use is Steam, which is the games one from Valve. And again, they're Krita leading the way. They've put their painting application on the Steam store, so you can install it on all the popular platforms. Steam is really popular amongst game players to get your apps. And again, they charge money for that, and people are happy to pay for that, and they've been able to hire developers for that. So the original question of how do you make money from open source, there's a great opportunity there. So we've got applications, we've got the desktop, we've got applications that are installable. One of the other problems for Linux on desktop is that unlike Apple, especially, and to some extent Microsoft, there's no integration with third-party suppliers. So we've been building up our partnerships with hardware suppliers recently to sell a bunch of laptops with our software pre-installed. The KDE Slimbook I highly recommend, but equally the Kubuntu Focus is a very good one, or Pinebook Pro is that's ARM-powered laptops. That's low cost, but ARM chips are pretty fast these days, and so that's fully functional. And because we have a lightweight plasma desktop, that works really well on their hardware. And then, of course, we want to branch out from just applications. We want to branch out into other areas. We've got Plasma Mobile, which is there and it works. But again, it needs somebody with knowledge of the hardware to be able to pick it up and run with it. But it's a successful project for people who want their phones not to hide into, like smart speakers. Here's one from a company called Mycroft, and they're looking into and keen to put KDE's Plasma onto their smart speaker. Games consoles, there are companies who are dipping their toes in there. So there's a bunch of opportunities that KDE can work with if we find the right partner who can use our software for their more specialist devices. Because one of the reasons why Linux on desktop hasn't taken off is there's no particular reason to change your laptop, but when you're changing devices, changing form factors to a smart speaker or a phone, that's what allows different projects to come in. And so KDE has been trying. We still need to find the right hardware partners, but anybody who wants to work with us, we've got the software that can work on your devices. That's the end of my talk. To give another plug for the Open Source Awards, please nominate people for these awards if they are fit into with the categories, if they're a young person, individual, if they have projects for open data, open hardware, software, and finance and fintech.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I've got a bunch of questions here for you, and I'm quite sure you mentioned ARM. Sami Atabani, who is here in his personal capacity, also works for ARM, and I'm sure he's going to have a question for you. It's interesting when you talk about the app stores, because one of the things that we are all in this sort of group, which is a spin out originally of our legal and policy group, really aware of are the developer problems and uploading apps to these other stores. And I'm assuming that you still have those same issues, and it's something I haven't looked at it for a while, But if you look at the Apple terms, there's probably a practical way to get around the sharing of the code. So there's probably a way to somehow link somewhere to make the code available on a website, which many companies do. And I think people are generally accepting its best efforts to do what you can. I think the bigger issue there, at least, used to be the DRM and the fact that it would restrict you to, it used to be 5. As I say, I haven't checked this in a couple of years, but you were restricted to loading onto a number of devices, which was an additional restriction. If anybody's interested, what happened a few years back, probably 7 or 8 years ago, is that multiple owners of copyright in a GPL licensed app on the Apple Store fell out. One of them threatened Apple, saying they were infringing the GPL. And Apple's response, kind of understandably, instead of giving the guy the money that he was hoping to get, was to remove GPL code. Now, as I say, it's something I've not looked at for a few years, but it is frustrating. And long before we would have considered Microsoft the open source partner they are today, their app store's terms were actually amongst the best. And they were very, very clear that the open source licensing overrode anything in their terms. So if there was a conflict between the two, that was how it worked. And it's something that I know, Jonathan, lots of developers have tried to fathom over many years. Are you still having issues with those kind of things, or are those issues from the past, the App Store terms?
Well, that's certainly a problem with the Apple one, which is why we haven't put anything there. As I understand it, people who use Mac laptops, actually, they haven't embraced the Mac App Store so much as people have with iPhones, because they're used to just being able to take a single file from wherever they download it from and it just working. So as I understand it, actually their App Store is not that popular. I haven't seen figures, that's just what I've heard. And so I'm not too fussed about not being on the Apple App Store. So because our stuff is available in other ways. It is available just to download and install from our download site or from Homebrew. And we've had long troubles with Apple because I mentioned before the web browser that they forked into WebKit. We all went, oh, that's great. They're going to help develop this along with us, and it didn't happen. They didn't develop it in an open sourcey way with either sending back patches or working directly with us. So that fork didn't work for us in terms of getting anything back. And well, that's part of the culture of Apple. And well, it works for them, so it's hard to criticize because they've been one of the most successful companies there are in terms of money. But yeah, they're not as openly friendly as they ought to be.
Sammy, did you have something you wanted to ask Jonathan there?
Yes, I do actually. So, Jonathan, thank you very much. It's a really, really very interesting, good talk. I have to say, I always find that sort of being able to point people to sort of say this is open source is really nice. Particularly, a lot of people are sort of in the consumer world. They want to know, oh, this is on my desktop or this is on my phone or so. So that's really, really quite impressive to see that. I certainly hadn't appreciated sort of the ARM laptop side. But I do have a question around the testing that you were talking about when you do the automated testing. What happens when you find issues? Do you then go and upstream to the project itself, the external third-party project, or do you just fix your versions that you are distributing?
That's very important that when you find problems in the stuff we're shipping, that they get fixed directly and where that gets made. So yes, it is the bane of my life that some distribution or some other third party will add in a wee patch into some KDE application, and so it works for them, but they don't manage to get that back to the application to make sure that it works for everybody, which is why I'm keen and spent many years now trying to get everything as close to KDE development as possible, so that whenever I have an issue, I can go to the people who are working on the application and know best how it can be fixed. So with KDE Neon, what I didn't mention is it automatically takes the release software and builds that, and then does a QA checks, and then gives it directly to the people. But it also builds stuff directly from Git master, from the unstable builds, and we've got that running automated. And so if there's a problem there, a compile failure, that's very obvious, flags up red. I can either fix it directly in the code or go to the people who know how to fix it. If there's a feature failure, well, I run, and I know many other people who are brave, will run the unstable branches directly on their laptops. So that can be found quickly. And the ideal place that I want to be is to have those open QA tests for every application, so that you know the application is running as it ought to be, and it's automatically verified. That's a long, slow, boring process to some extent, setting that up.
Yeah, but I guess it's all well and good to get the app developers to do the fix. But what I'm talking about is that do you go to the source project? So if you downloaded, I don't know, something from a project that is hosted from on GitHub, do you then go back and contribute those fixes to the main project so that it is fixed moving forwards?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or do you apply? Yeah, I mean, again, this is, I guess the reason why I asked the question is that it is about forking, and why sometimes we see multiple forks out there, leading to even more confusion. Which distribution is this? It's the same, but it has this fix added to it, and that is really, I mean, generally, when people come to me for requests on wanting to use a particular project, we ask the questions: what is your long-term plan? If you find issues, how are you going to manage those contributions back to the and upstream them to the main project, so that this problem is fixed at source, rather than continuously having to apply these fixes in what we distribute?
Yep, and that's why in KDE we're really keen
Painful.
to emphasize the common ownership, so that often people will fork a project on GitHub because they can't get it back upstream, because the developer is no longer responsive, or just happens to have some different vision. And within KDE, if the developer is no longer responsive, that's okay, because other people can come along and put in the fixes and start working on the application. And that's why we've got programs that have been running for well over 20 years as a project. Krita was that flagship application, and in that it manages to cover all the bases. That's a 20-year-old project, and it's died a number of deaths in its time as developers have come and gone, but it's been able to be revived because it's got that common ownership, and it's never had a fork. It's never had somebody take it over here and say, I'm going to rename it into something else and just do my own thing, or I've got this one particular fix that I really want to have in, I'm going to add that, and then that bit rots and so forth.
Right.
That doesn't happen within KDE because of the communal ownership setup.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I have a question / comment if unless anybody else has anything to say, but shout now if not. But I was just going to say it's really interesting hearing what you're saying about the sort of change in approach that's happened over time. I remember when I sort of first started dabbling in using open source software and using Linux, and sort of going back at sort of Hardy Heron levels of Ubuntu 8 and things like that from 2004, and realizing, oh, I'm in the GNOME environment, I can't install a bit of KDE software, or I need to go and install Kubuntu in order to try and use KDE stuff. And yeah, it was much harder to try and move things between different sort of strands of which kind of area of Linux you'd kind of chosen to pick up. And it's really cool to actually see that you're sort of helping lead the charge to try and say, it doesn't matter where we're running it. It's like our apps are important. We want people to use them. And if that's on Windows or Mac or whatever, we're trying to get it out there as much as we possibly can. But also those solutions you come up for containerization of the app itself to allow it to run across all those different platforms and across all just different types of Linux as well, or GNU Linux, then yeah, it's really cool to see that that's actually changing, because it makes it a lot easier to try and actually use it as well.
It's a game changer. is one reason why when I've installed Linux or shown people Linux and said, you should use this hippie stuff, none of that proprietary nonsense, it controls you, and then they say, well, okay, great, how do I install this application? Oh, but you need to actually upgrade your version or something, and then from an end user point of view, well, that means Linux is controlling them, and Windows and Mac, because you can install anything for Windows on Windows, and you can install anything for Mac on Mac. They feel a lot more in control, which wasn't the case with Linux. And so, yeah, I'm really keen to embrace the newer containerized formats, because it is a game changer for our users.
It's a really interesting point, because it leads into sort of our next thing, actually. We were supposed to have Cheryl Hung from the CNCF coming in to talk to us about cloud. And I think, Jonathan, you and I both experienced a particular time at Canonical where we were looking at something that started life for the desktop and rapidly went from consumers to prosumers as we move into a cloud environment, filling multiple purposes. And the big shift in tech, and particularly in open source in the last 10 years, is that there's a lot of this now is not about the desktop, but it's about the platforms and the cloud. And in some ways that might make it easier for the desktop to become open, to become Linux-based. The prosumer obviously has found it easier to use open because they can deal with all those sort of interface sort of issues. They know how to do it, whereas an individual needs everything packaged up for them as a consumer, unless they have some sort of level of technical knowledge. And actually, we were meant to have Cheryl next week, but Cheryl has had to postpone through to September, and she's going to be part of the talks that we do September, October around the more commercial end of open, with a number of different open source companies participating. So we will make a natural progression next week, either with me picking up on where Jonathan and Neil McGovern, who spoke to us last week, left off on the desktop and the apps. And Neil's talk was called All About the Desktop, which led us beautifully into yours, Jonathan, on the apps. And it's been a wonderful talk. Thank you. But the next step is then to take that further into this sort of platform base and understand where it all fits together. And that's what we hope to bring next week, either through myself or I'm not going to tell you who it is in case they can't do it, but a much better speaker than me. But I think what's really interesting, whether you are watching these talks as you go, some people have picked and dipped in and out. Many people watch the videos afterwards. And they actually, Jonathan, have built a story. I know you've been in one or two of the others, but if you go back and look at how the story has flowed, we've set the scene with all of the IP and we've understood what that is. And then we started to look at community and where this all came from with you and Neil. Later in July, I think, we've got more community folk talking before we move to hardware and data. I think one of those is Matt Jarvis, who's going to talk about contributions. Another is Don Foster, who's going to talk about being a good citizen, a good corporate citizen and contributing. So I'm going to say thank you and hand you over to Katie, unless Sammy's going to jump in.
Yeah, no, I was just going to reiterate. I think it's exactly you captured what I wanted to say very well, Amanda, in terms of the story on these talks and to see really, okay, this is where it's used. It really is. It brings things to life. So thank you very much, Jonathan, from me. I thought it was a really good talk.
Yes, just to echo both Amanda and Sammy, thank you so much again for your time, and thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. Next week we've got possibly Amanda talking about open source, where are we now? So hopefully people will join us next week at the same time. Thank you.